We are going to discuss the relationship between contemporary Indian social reality and sociological theory. What I am going to pose right at the beginning is the difficulty of connecting sociological theory, which has predominantly emerged in the West European context at a particular juncture of history, at the time of the Industrial Revolution, at the time of the French Revolution, influenced by Western Enlightenment, and our own Indian social realities, which has had a very distinctive historical entry into modernity through colonialism. Now, these two realities in a certain sense are very, very different, one located in 19th century West Europe, one located in our context. Yet whenever we do sociology, we have to invariably look at the thinkers, the classical sociological thinkers. We have to look at Durkheim, we have to look at Weber, we have to look at Marx, and the question that invariably arises in every teacher and every student of sociology is, why do we have to do it? Are they relevant to our context or not? Or do we have to develop our own conceptual tools and our own theoretical formulations in order to capture the social reality which constitutes India? This is particularly so because our social reality is also not static, nor is the social reality out there in the West static. They are connected, they are dynamic, and they change at every different junctures. So, should sociological theory also respond to these social changes? In fact, the question should be probably posed the other way around, that what is the relationship which exists between society, the social context, and sociological theory. We have with us today Professor Yogendra Singh. In fact, there could be nobody better than him to probably discuss the relationship between the Indian society, the Indian social realities, and sociological theory. Sir, the first thing that I would like to introduce to the students is the fact that Professor Yogendra Singh has been somebody who has been engaged throughout his life with this entire issue about how do we understand Indian social reality. He has been in fact partial in emphasizing the need to look at theoretical questions, to look at conceptual questions, and apply it to empirical reality. He has been one of those scholars who has been extremely sensitive to the need for a philosophical approach to sociological theory, and somebody who at the same time simultaneously has dealt with the intricate details which have constituted Indian society. There can be perhaps, like I said, nobody better than Professor Yogendra Singh to speak about this whole dynamic relationship between the two. Sir, how would you like to introduce this area for the
Thank you for kind words. Fact of the matter is that Indian sociology has right from its beginning being engaged with the issues of contemporaneity. But contemporaneity has its own historical context, because we have a time framework, and as you rightly mentioned, European sociology emerged as a result of its own historical conversions, and sociology and sociological theory there was always orientated to the kind of burning issues that they faced in the process of their social transformation, such as the Industrial Revolution, such as the emergence of the new relationship between church and the society, the need of a civil society and civil rights, citizenship rights, and impact of new technology, which was commensurate with the crafting process of a new discipline, sociology at that time. We have to recognize that sociology, as it emerged in the 18th, towards the end of the 18th, 19th century period, had a unique history both in United States of America and the continent, European continent. But as both these places, one sees that sociology became viable as a discipline after some resistance because of engaging the conceptual framework, theoretical constructs with the empirical reality, because sociology distinguished itself not only as a pedagogic, philosophical configuration of concepts and philosophical premises, but as also an instrument of forging tools for understanding and empirically verifying, experimenting with the day-to-day issues, the contemporary issues which were bothering society. This was so USA, where the migration and of people and the early phases of their industrial development, the convergence of several cultures and how to find out a coexistence among them. In Europe, the problems of state emerging as a new framework within nationhood, and technology outcrossing the boundaries of earlier belief in the religious and church oriented matrices of defining the life world. So, sociology here also was engaged in the study of issues which emerge out of this transition, issues such as poverty, issues such as exploitation of laborers and working classes in the factories, issues of gender, issues of kind of degradation of women.
So, can I sort of just at this point ask you a question, which you meant that there was a huge upheaval in Western Europe at the time sociology emerged in a certain sense to understand this. And in India, similarly, there was huge transformations with the coming in of colonialism, the relationships which transformed urban-rural relationships. But the point that I wanted to ask you, that whereas in the West, there was a dramatic transition from feudalism to capitalism, a dramatic transition from tradition to modernity. In our context in India, there was in a certain sense a term which probably you have used also, continuity and change. So, there was continuities in, like, you had capitalism beginning, but you had feudal relations persisting. You had modernization coming in, but tradition persisting. You had urbanization, but rural persisting. So, how would you apply the kind of sociological theories which arise there, say to understand something like little and great tradition, or to understand something like rural urban community?
In fact, the point that I was trying to make is linked with this issue. Because of the urgent pressure of the contemporary tensions of change in Europe, sociological theory was developing, and most sociological thinkers were engaged in two types of theorization. One, for instance, Karl Marx, he took cognizance of the process of exploitation and conflict. He took note of the issues of emancipation through class struggle, but he also anchored it into philosophical background of European tradition, alienation. So, alienation is a broader framework which we find in Marxist theory, and same about Durkheim and Max Weber, trying to look at, Durkheim looks at religion and society as the major issue, which was in which he was trying to work out a via media really to develop a new philosophical perspective, which is called representation. And when we come to India, we find that our context has been slightly different, and our difference arises out of the specificity of the Indian social structure and tradition, which you rightly mentioned, and also our historical experience. Our historical experience is colonialism. I think colonialism and colonial consciousness, the consciousness of the West as imposing its paradigm of civilization as well as cognition of reality on a society which was itself a civilization society, because we have to take note of that India like China and Japan was a civilization society. Now, civilization society has intricacies of its social structure and tradition, because tradition permeates through the pores of social structure in many different and various ways, and it interpenetrates structures like family, community, economy, polity. So, all this was there, which was the stuff from which the Indians had to develop their own sociology. But early sociologists like Sarkar in Bengal and later Radhakmal Mukherjee and D.P. Mukherjee, all of them, we find that in their writing there are two strands. One strand is how to look at Western sociological theory as far as India is concerned. In one ways there is acceptance, but the acceptance is always partial. For instance, if we take Sarkar's work on positive view of Hindu philosophy, it is noteworthy that the entire effort, this book, is a critique of the Shukraniti and an attempt to adumbrate a perspective of positivistic sociology, kind of a sociology which will recognize Indian reality and empirically try to comprehend it and verify its processes, and at the same time rejection of the perspective of positivism from the West, such as he refers to Kant, he refers to Karl Marx, he refers to Durkheim, and rejects all of them, says that their positivism is not totally applicable to the Indian situation, because that positivism is rooted in their own tradition and their own philosophy. So, it is the first attempt, in fact. When we come to Radhakmal Mukherjee and D.P. Mukherjee's writings, things are very obvious, even though across 30 or more books that Radhakmal Mukherjee wrote, we find elements of Western theorizing, such as in economics, institutional economics. In sociology, the elements of some kind of a communitarianism and integration of groups and communities, issues of population. We find in his writings the elements of even environmental concern, ecology, and relationship between ecology and sociology at that time. And finally, we also find in his later works the critique of civilization. He talks of destiny of human civilization. So, a very larger paradigm of sociology.
So, here at this point I would sort of like to ask you that there are two issues that you are raising. One is the Indian sociological theorists' own attempt to negotiate with Western theories. On one hand, they do address them, but at the same time they want to reject and redefine what would be specifically to India. The other point, specifically in concern with your own work on modernization of Indian tradition, the issue of dichotomization, that in the West there seemed to be a dichotomy between the modern and the tradition, the issue between say community and society, little and great tradition. But whereas, like you just mentioned, the whole issue of civilizational aspects of our society, there seems to be a much not a dichotomy so much as a coexistence. So, if you could just taking these examples.
It is a very important issue, no doubt, because entire Western philosophy and Western reckoning of reality, attempt to comprehend, is based on linear thinking, and is a part of this dichotomous way of looking at reality: tradition, modernity, rich and poor, equality, inequality. And it defines reality in a manner in which the time, the reckoning of time is very simply differentiated on a single continuum. On the other hand, Indian philosophy and Indian tradition has looked at both time as well as a social structure in a non-linear fashion, in an organic fashion. In some ways a cyclical notion of time, That is a very important part, and every Indian is very conscious of not only this world of here and now, which dominates Western civilization, but world beyond, world which is going to come. So, the human destiny for an average Indian does not end with the life and death continuum. It continues, it transcends. So, the issue of transcendence in time reckoning of Indian tradition is spilled over to the nitty gritty actual operation of the institutional systems, and both combined together gave India a resilience in two ways, which I have tried to explain in my earlier work, Modernization of Indian Tradition, that on the one hand it makes Indians responsive and adaptive to change, anything which comes from anywhere. If it is selectively proved valid, it is adapted, but at the same time the rejection is also there. They do not accept everything. On the other hand, it maintains tradition, the world view, the way that they define their reality. So, both combined together have been helpful in India to link sociological matrix, its conceptual paradigms, with the issues of contemporaneity, because contemporaneity does not bother Indians in this sense, it does not oppress, it is only a challenge, and they know how to reconcile the present. This, if we look at the kind of issues that have emerged in Indian sociology, empirical issues from time to time, the issues in the early phases was urban development, rural community development, issues of land reforms, issues of the political culture, emergence of new political parties, issues of factories, capital investment. Later on becomes the issues of migration, issues of gender, issues of new generation coming up.
So, if I may at this point, raise this whole issue of, for large part, Indian sociological theory was grappling with the concept of modernization, which again had of course a very specific social historical context. But today, as you mentioned, the contemporary reality, we are grappling with the concept of globalization. So, you are one of the scholars who have looked at both modernization and more recently on globalization. So, if you could help us understand what is it which is common between these two concepts and what is it which is different?
Modernization is a process, at the same time it is a concept, and as a concept modern and modernity becomes the anchorage on which the notion is founded or located. On the other hand, modernization is the manner in which the whatever we define as modernity, because I think that modernity is not universal. There is not one way of defining modernity. There can be different ways of defining modernity, because modernity after all is a heuristic concept. It is device for sociologists to understand reality, because when we look at reality in any society and we evaluate it in terms of our paradigm of modernity, then we find that there are elements which are outside also, the traditional or residual elements. When we come to modernization, then it is the process. Now, the same elements which we configurate to define modernity, modernization means how they have been operating in a particular society in terms of its own history and contemporaneity. Now, when we talk of globalization, the same paradigms which we use for defining modernity, they will have to undergo some change, because there are certain elements that are new in globalization, which were not envisaged earlier in the notion of modernity. For instance, one issue which is very clearly divergent is the issue of space. That is, globalization transcends nation states, globalization transcends ethnic closed structure of communities. Globalization also puts pressure, even though it may not always transcend the native traditions, the local traditions. So, there is a debate about the local and the global. Now, these are new issues. Globalization also means new manner in which migration takes place, although migration is very old. In fact, some social scientists and historians, for instance, Bailey talks of early modernization, early globalization and later globalization.
Right.
So, if one can say migration is a measure of globalization, the migration was always there. But how does the globalization which is we define in contemporary differ? Because the nature of migration is changing, nature of society is undergoing change. For instance, one major force which is encouraging globalization is the demand for labor, demand for skill.
Right.
Now, this was confined to nation and national boundaries earlier. It is no longer confined. Skills of production, capitalist institutions, the locale of investment, the notion of profit, all this has undergone change. Capitalism itself has undergone change. So, that is one factor which did not exist in the past. Population is differential rate. Population rich countries is declining very fast. Right. Population in developing societies is still maintaining a certain level. So, there is demand for skills, therefore, migration becomes inevitable. Right. And is accepted. This never existed in the past. Next, I think the media and information technology is a very important distinctive feature which adds a new phase to modernization, which we can call globalization. So, essentially one can say that globalization is a new form of modernization.
Okay.
One way of defining it.
But the challenges of Indian sociological theory, in a certain sense, do you feel that today we are more confident, Indian sociological writings or theory, about negotiating with globalization, or what very often, the debate between indigeneity and Western nature, which continue in the journals of sociology today, that does it persist? Has there been a break, or how would you look at it?
Well, I think that in many ways in India, consensual nature of early sociology has undergone change.
Okay.
And I think it's a very interesting sociology of Indian sociology. That is how really, who were the early sociologists? Now, early sociologists came from a certain class,
right,
a certain viewpoint.
Right.
They were traditional middle class,
right,
and their way of looking at reality was governed by their own past, and their own tradition of knowledge and cognition. What has happened in the process of change and today, that this has differentiated. Sociologists now come from all classes. So, there is a consciousness of Dalit sociology,
right,
the sociology of the underdog. Many more women are now in the profession.
This is really interesting that probably at the end of this discussion, Professor Singh has brought us back to the close connection which exists between the contemporary Indian social reality and sociological theory. Like he puts it so well, that the fact that we have new assertive social identities impinges itself on the manner in which sociological theory and empirical research is done. To go back very briefly to the discussion that we had, we saw the manner in which sociological theory emerged in the West and the manner in which that travels to us. Very often, like I said before, we ask the question, why do we have to do Western sociological theory? As the discussion with Professor Yogendra Singh showed us, that the issues which confronted them and the issues which confronted us in a certain sense may be different, but in very fundamental senses it's not entirely different. At that point they were negotiating with the transformation of capitalism in the early stage. Today in globalization we are confronting the changes of capitalism which is happening today, which brings us to the fact that we should never look at theory and empirical research as two completely dichotomous entities, but at two entities which are very closely interlinked with each other. Thank you.